Welcome to the bizval podcast. At bizval, we are passionate about empowering entrepreneurs the world over to understand and unlock the value in their business. We work with advisors and entrepreneurs to demystify the value creation process when building a business. At bizval, we know how tough it is to grow and run a business, which is exactly why we've made valuations simple to understand, accurate, and affordable. Our unique blend of tech and touch ensures that you always receive the best service, authentic human engagement, and data-led insights to ensure that you build a business that provides you with freedom and choice. In the bizval podcast, we showcase stories of real entrepreneurs and advisors, sharing lessons and inspiration from their journeys to make your journey just that little bit easier.
Today, I'm really excited to be joined by somebody who, he's a fantastic guy, but he embodies legacy, innovation, and leadership altogether. So I'm really building him up here. But Stuart Noland, the head of Nolands Capital. Stuart's part of a firm that was started by his father and his uncle in the late 1970s. And it's grown into a truly international professional services group. So we're going to explore a little bit today about what it takes to build across generations, importantly, the values that drive a business forward, and how Nolands continues to innovate in today's sort of changing advisory landscape. So, Stuart, it's wonderful to have you here today.
Hi, Graham. Yeah, thanks very much for having me. I'm really excited about the opportunity to be on the podcast today and looking forward to sharing a little bit about my background and Nolands and the path that we've gone on to get to where we are today.
Fantastic. So I think just in terms of the structure for our listeners, we're going to talk a little bit about the founding story of Nolands. Hopefully you've had some family meetings and you can fill in all the detail around that. Joining the family business. We're going to talk about, as I said earlier, about building an international advisory network, and you can talk a bit about the countries that you're in. And pre the show, as you said, you're going off to Mauritius next week, so maybe that's one of the perks of an international business. You get to have island holidays every now and again. The values, people, and partnerships, and then importantly, sort of that succession and leadership transition. I think that's a key part of the discussion. So I think to kick off, Stuart, let's talk about the origins of Nolands. So the story goes back almost 5 decades. Don't you sort of share a little bit about how it all began?
Yeah, thanks, Graham. I think so. Nolands was founded in 1976. So you're right. I think next year's our 50th birthday, so to speak, which is very exciting. Started by my dad Clive and his brother George, both chartered accountants, finished their articles coming through the traditional CA route out of university. I think they were both from quite humble beginnings. Unfortunately, my grandfather passed away when they were both very young, so raised by a single mother. And really had to kind of build. We're really excited to build something themselves, based on the strong foundation that they had coming out of university. I think they quickly realized that the existing, call it accounting or auditor, the players in the market at that stage were mainly international based, and it's what my dad always refers to as the old boys club, in that there was a very big emphasis on what school you went to, what your pedigree was, what your background was, etc., in terms of promotion opportunities and where you got to. And he and his brother realized that there was a big gap in the market for something different. And the premise that they based the firm on at that stage was, they didn't want to be your ordinary chartered accountant. And even to this day, one of our taglines is, not your ordinary auditors, not your ordinary chartered accountants, but they wanted to be different. They didn't want to walk into a room and for everyone to say, "Oh, here are the auditors." And they specifically based their strategy on fostering these very deep relationships. And that's kind of how they differentiated themselves early on. Obviously started out a very small firm. I think it was 2 or 3 of them. It's basically the typical startup story, working from home in those days, which was obviously a lot more challenging than it is now without the technology. and having to find different and unique ways in terms of building a client base effectively from nothing. The main way they started that was through sport. So my father was a very good sportsman. He played semi-professional soccer at that point in time, SA universities, cricket, baseball, soccer, etc. And through those networks that they developed specifically around the Western Cape area, they were able to start to pick up small bits of business, which ultimately grew into something to where we are today. I've always said my dad is actually more of a marketer trapped in an auditor's body. So he loves relationships, he loves networking, he loves getting out there and meeting people, and actually understanding what, a little bit more about them to the core. And even when they started the business, he really was friends. When I say friends, he was close friends with 95% of his clients. So he would go to their house for braais. He would build that foundation, and it's off that foundation he was able to slowly grow the firm and build a reputation that he could ultimately use as a springboard to kind of more formal business operations thereafter.
I mean, it's a fascinating backstory, and I just love the parts that you emphasize around relational and building relationships. At the end of the day, it's not about accountancy or tax and that. It's about, actually what you're selling is you're selling trust. And it sounds simple, but people do business with people that they like and trust. And I think obviously your dad kind of intuitively knew that. I mean, they still had to be able to do T accounts back then and add up journals and all those sorts of things. Clearly, they did that quite well. I mean, maybe if you can share a little bit, before, your journey is, obviously it was your dad and your brother, your dad and your uncle. Did they sort of complement each other? You spoke about your dad being quite relational. And what did it mean to them as brothers, I guess, having grown up in a, single mom household without a dad and all of that? Were there elements of that kind of came into that relationship, and almost, Nolan's being a bit of a legacy and building that? I mean, yeah, I'd love to hear if there's a little bit more behind that.
Yes, I think 100%, Graham. I think they really had a drive to build something, and they did complement each other very well. I think my uncle George is very technical, very intellectual, very smart. Also very much a people's person, but very different to my father, who was more on the sporty side. So I think that they complement each other very well. And I think growing up together, they knew each other very well, and they knew each other's strengths and weaknesses very well. And I think that was a key component of building the business in the early years. Obviously, working with your brother or working in any family business, you're going to have disagreements, and you're going to have kind of the sibling rivalry and sibling banter that goes along the way. But it's always from a good place, I think, and it's always because they really wanted to build something together, and prove everyone else wrong, that they could start their own firm from nothing without the kind of infrastructure and the background of some of the more established firms, and do things slightly differently. And I think the one thing that they did differently in those early years, in addition to forming those strong relationships, was they really had an entrepreneurial mindset, not only the way in which they started the firm, but also the types of clients that they like to attract. And even to this day, there are still a number of Nolands clients that have been with the firm for 40 plus years, who also started out with, a dream and one small company or one small store or petrol station, etc., that has now grown into multi-million or billion rand operations over the last 40 years. And Nolands has been with them through that journey, which has, I think, been really special.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So I'm going to move a little bit to your story, Stuart. You yourself have had an impressive career in finance, capital advisory, and you didn't kind of just come out of school or university straight into the family business. You kind of went and carved your own path for a little bit. And then you came back into the family business, so to speak. So was that always part of the plan? Was it something that evolved naturally? If you can just share a little bit about your background and kind of how you ended up where you are today.
Yeah, so I mean, I went through quite a traditional CA background coming out of school. So I think my father always made sure that I had the right building blocks in place to leave my options open. So I studied accounting at school. I went to UCT. I did the business science, finance, CA option all the way through. But I was always very mindful that I didn't want to seem like I was just being parachuted into the business and I hadn't earned my own stripes. So for me specifically, it was very important that I went out and did my own thing first. I got different exposure, different experience, and kind of proved myself not only to others but also to myself that I can do it without having the cloud over my head of, oh, he's joining the family business, he's just been parachuted into a role that he doesn't necessarily deserve. So you know, leaving the once I completed I did my articles at KPMG in Cape Town. I then transferred to the London office with KPMG, where I was a manager in the financial services division for a period. I then decided to study further, so I did a master's in finance and then an MBA at the University of Oxford. And then I was kind of at a crossroads, and I decided that, you know, did I want to work abroad or move back home? I decided to move back home with Bain and Company in the management consulting role. And I did that for a number of years to kind of hone some of my consulting skills before ultimately joining the family business in 2019. Having said that, obviously growing up in a family business, you're always close to the family business. It's always part of your, you know, the business kind of, it ran through everyone's blood growing up. It was my dad's, you know, I didn't even see my dad much growing up, to be honest, because he was always traveling, always building the business. And you know, if I was attending Nolands functions from 10 years old, you know, just helping out where I can. When the firm was still small, I started as a filing clerk at 16. My dad made me work every single school holiday from 16 years old. So I was very familiar with the business. But again, for me, it was important to go out, do my own thing, get the right level of experience before returning.
Was that always part of the plan that you know, in your mind, or certainly in your dad's mind, that you would join the business? Or was it a case of, hey, go explore the world, do your own thing, and if you happen to find your way back into the family business fold, fantastic. If not, we'll support you in whatever you choose to do. What did that journey look like?
So we never actively spoke about me joining the business, which was interesting. I think there was always an implicit expectation, or I could tell that my dad would have loved for me to have joined the business, but we never spoke about it, and he never put pressure on me. And I think when I finally decided to come back and make that decision, I actually had to approach him and say, you know, you've built, you know, it's very impressive what you built, and it would almost be silly of me not to give it a go, right? To step in, throw my hat into the ring, and see what value I can add, and use what I've learned in all the different businesses and roles that I'd been in up until that point, to bring value into the family business. And for me, it was quite important. I never wanted to work for my father. So when he started the business, it was always an audit business that focused on audit, tax, and secretarial. That was the core business for the first 45 years or 44 years of operation. What we realized is, you know, the audit industry was shifting. There was a lot of pressure on auditors to not necessarily add value to their clients because of various independence concerns and pressures from IRBA. So it was important for a lot of firms to move into this advisory space, which was separate from audit, which was a way for us to really continue to add value to our clients, but remain independent and compliant. And so when I joined the firm, that's kind of was my main role, was to set up and to formalize the advisory function of the business, and start moving towards Nolands offering a broader range of services and effectively capturing a larger portion of our clients' wallets and our clients' needs.
Yeah. So while you also had the experience, I mean, as you say, you had been at Bain, you'd been in management consulting, so you came in with a very different perspective and able to almost carve out your own niche, if you want to call it, with Nolands Capital, which is what you head up now. And I think that's such a beautiful story. It's you earn your own stripes, you come in, but you added value into the business, and that was your mindset. You weren't coming in with, how do I just kind of extract from what's being built. It's like, how do I add to this? And I think that's a really powerful lesson, because often when we talk about succession in businesses, whether it's family businesses or not, it's like succession doesn't mean go and do what the previous CEO did. Succession means, yeah, the business needs to keep going, but it's continually evolving and changing direction and being fine-tuned. And I think that encapsulates it so wonderfully, Stuart. So you had spent a bit of time in the UK. I want to move a little bit onto sort of like the building of an international sort of network and advisory network. And I think for non-South African listeners, if you just think of the timeline around Nolands being built, late 70s, 80s, at that stage, South Africa was probably at the height of the isolationist apartheid era. So I guess in those days, it wasn't even on the cards to sort of think about expanding internationally. But I think one of the remarkable things about what you guys have done is that international footprint. So you've got operations that extend and clients that extend way beyond South Africa. Can you talk a little bit about how the business evolved from, which I guess started as a local, regional-based practice with a strong relationship focused, into what is now a networked global firm? Maybe what does that look like today? And then how did you get there?
Yeah, so I think the priorities of the firm shifted over time as we grew. And starting out in Cape Town and capturing, building a big presence in the Western Cape was an important building block initially. But as we grew and we tried to become really an alternative to the Big Four at that time, we realized that it was important we could offer our clients initially a national solution. So the expansion first started out moving from Cape Town up the coast to Durban. Then we moved and set up an operation in Johannesburg. And ultimately, we had the mindset that we needed to go where our clients were, because we wanted to be able to service our clients. And as our clients grew, it became very important that if we weren't able to service them in the key markets locally, then they would have to move to a firm that could. So initially,
and obviously, to interrupt you very quickly, back in those days, there wasn't Zoom and Teams meetings and all those things. I mean, this was like physically set up offices.
Correct.
And
when you
present, right?
Yeah. Then when you needed to go and audit someone, you needed to go to their premises and physically inspect the books and the files. So it wasn't as easy as it is now. And I think a similar story goes on to the international expansion. So at the moment, I think we're 9 offices in South Africa. And then the next step, we had very similar conversations with our clients. We had clients saying, I'm looking to open up an operation in Nigeria or in Zimbabwe or Zambia. Are you able to help with the audits? And at that point, we'd say, look, well, we know 1 or 2 guys in those regions, but it's not Nolands offices. And it became quite a difficult sell to ensure that your client was looked after and that the quality and the work that these guys were doing was of a Nolands standard. And so very, very similarly, we made the decision that if we were going to continue to service our clients locally, we needed to have an international solution, specifically an African footprint. Then over the last 15 years, we've opened those 7 offices in Africa, with the view, I think, moving forward of continuing to expand that footprint going forward.
Fantastic. I mean, what are some of the challenges that you've faced in sort of scaling, professional services internationally? I think you spoke about quality control and all of those sorts of things, but I mean, there must be other issues, communication barriers, compliance, all of that. What have been the biggest challenges in doing that?
So I think the most important thing for us is the brand. Nolands, the brand. It's been built over 50 years, and making sure that you protect that brand as you expand is critically important. And as you know, it can take 50 years to build a brand and 10 minutes to ruin it, right? And we've seen that with a lot of our competitors. There's been a huge amount of pressure and negative press on some of the accounting and audit competitors in the market. And we every decision we make when going abroad is how do we minimize those risks. And it really comes down, I mean, you mentioned some of them. Obviously, compliance is important. For us, that's a tick box exercise. You know, you need to ensure that that's the bare minimum, right, in terms of what everyone's doing. But identifying the right people to run those offices, putting in place the right training, and ensuring that the hiring and recruitment policies are correct has been by far the biggest learnings that we've picked up since expanding. And it's not easy, because to set up an office in Zimbabwe, for example, I think my dad met with over 300 potential firms who wanted that license in Zimbabwe to operate. And narrowing that down and finding the right people who you can trust and actually sit down and have a conversation with and get that warm, fuzzy feeling takes a huge amount of time and effort to get it right. But in the long run, it's really has, proved dividends in the fact that we formed very, very strong relationships with our partners internationally. We ensure that we have very regular communication. So we have annual conferences every year where all of the international partners come together just to ensure we can maintain that culture and that way of working. And we call it the Nolands way, right? In terms of how we expect everyone to interact and behave, so that when our clients go abroad, they're getting a very, very similar feel and experience from the various offices around the continent.
Yeah, and I think it's fascinating. Obviously, Nolands was grounded in sort of the old school face-to-face building of relationships. Today, it's easy to kind of get a presence internationally, especially with online businesses and all of those sorts of things. But the reality is nothing beats FaceTime. But that also comes with challenges and compromises. If you're building a business, you're away from your family, you're traveling, you're doing all of those things. And, just to bring a little bit of sort of the bizval story around that, we are growing in the US, in the UK. And it resonates a lot of what you're sharing is that it's all very well to find us on the internet in the US, but you've got to have the right person on the ground. The same in the UK. You've got to get there, go and see clients, play a round of golf with them, even if you play badly, have a meal, break bread with them, so those things matter, which I think is a sort of a nice segue into sort of the next section around sort of values, people, and partnerships, so you've spoken a lot about that. It's people first, it's long-term relationships, it's integrity. Talk a little bit about, the Nolands values, the Nolands way, as you talk about it. What are those sort of key values, and how do you think those have contributed to and shaped the growth of the business, but also things like the clients that you choose to work with, and the partners that you choose to engage with?
Yeah, so I think, it's one thing having values, and it's another thing adhering to those values. And I think what Nolands has done really well is, because our values have been very clear and very consistent over a long period of time, we make almost all of our business decisions with those values in mind. And it's not complex. You mentioned a couple of them. Obviously, relationships and solutions, very, very important. Trust, extremely important. But overarching, I think we like to have fun in what we do. We don't take ourselves too seriously. I think a lot of the recruitment that we do, we hire for personality, not just technical ability. And we really believe that a lot of people, you can learn a lot of the technical skills required to do a job with proper training and mentorship and experience. But what's a lot more difficult to learn is, being a nice guy, being personable, being polite, being respectful. And even in the way in which we deal with our clients, we are very, very specific in terms of which client relationships we choose to pursue, and to go into business with, regardless of the financial implications of that relationship. We need to make sure that they also fit the Nolands values, and that our staff are well taken care of, and that they're very comfortable working at all the various client sites that they have to go to.
Yeah. I mean, it's fascinating because especially a lot of entrepreneurial businesses and startup businesses and that, the focus nowadays is like on chasing revenue and how do you grow? Okay, and how do you grow
Yeah.
quickly so you can raise the next round of funding? And I mean, you obviously see it with a lot of your clients being in the Nolands Capital space as well. But I think sometimes you need to take that pause back and say, are these the right people that we're doing business with in terms of your clients? A lot of people, like, not all revenue is created equal, right? So when you talk about building a business of value, it's like, well, what percentage are recurring businesses or recurring revenue? And most people immediately assume, well, do you have a subscription and is there a direct debit going off every month? That's recurring revenue. But actually, a better form of recurring revenue is the kind of client who chooses to come back to you, even though they don't have to. Okay.
Yeah,
Or who
100%.
voluntarily says, hey, you're looking for an auditor, use my guys. I mean, I don't know how many people love to recommend auditors. I'm joking. I mean, I'm a chartered accountant myself, but I mean, that's the kind of stuff that really matters. Maybe just share a little bit about, I don't know if you've got a story along the way. Have you ever let go of a client? I mean, obviously no names mentioned, but have you ever been through a journey when you're trying to sign up a client and then you've realized, wow, actually, you know what, there isn't a fit here, and kind of shifted away? I'm putting you on the spot.
No, look, I think there's definitely been examples like that where we've either decided to not take the appointment on because of feelings we've had in the pitch process, or down the line where we don't believe that the client and our values are aligned. We've decided to step away. So it's and it happens on a regular basis, to be honest. And I think the big thing now in the market is, so with South Africa on the grey list, everyone's talking about KYC, know your client. But really, in the Nolands ecosystem, if you are living the Nolands values and you are really forming a close relationship with your client and you are really getting to know them on a more personal level, then KYC almost becomes a tick box exercise rather than a kind of a business critical process. And that's kind of what we found. So most of our clients, if I'm being honest, have been with the firm for a very, very long period of time, specifically on the audit side as well, where it's more an annual service offering. Obviously, on the advisory side, it's a much younger part of the business. And so there we are still going through a lot of teething pains in terms of, what type of clients are we trying to target and what does that look like and what are the implications for the rest of the business. But yeah, I think it's, as you know, with any kind of new venture, even if it is within an established firm, you go through a lot of these teething problems that we've had to kind of learn a few tough lessons, pay some school fees. But luckily, with the support of the broader business around us, we've been able to get through that and continue to grow and improve over time.
Fantastic. So I'm going to move on to kind of the sort of the thing that we love to talk about. You spoke about it at the beginning, but sort of succession and leadership transitions. Okay, so you've shared a bit about your story, how you came into the business, but you're not the only person in the family. Okay, and I think many businesses, particularly family businesses, what's the HBO show Succession, right? I mean, it's an entertaining look at succession, so to speak. But when it comes to generational leadership, handing over the reins, it's not just about system and process and tick the box. It can be emotional, it can be complex. How has Nolan's approached sort of succession and continuity? And talk about your story, also other people within the business. How do you create succession for people in the business who are not part of the family? So let's just have an open chat around what that's meant for Nolan's and how you've approached that.
So I think you hit the nail on the head there, Graham, when you spoke about other people in the business. And you say they're not family, but we consider everyone who works at Nolan's part of the family, realistic. I know maybe not blood family, but
I mean in the technical sense, right?
Yeah, sure, of course. And it's a cheesy thing to say, but similar to our client relationships, we have a very large number of employees who've been with the business for now 35, 40 plus years. I think by creating an environment in which people enjoy working, and creating a culture where one of we have these things called keystone habits, which I haven't really touched on, but we have 25 keystone habits which kind of form part of our culture. And the one keystone habit which everyone remembers very clearly is don't be an asshole. And that's kind of something that everyone at Nolands knows. And it goes down to everyone's core. It's like, when you're making decisions, don't be an arsehole. Be a nice guy, be a good oak, be someone that, people often talk about, I'm getting a bit sidetracked now. People often talk about the airport test. If you're going to an airport and you're boarding a flight and your flight is delayed by a couple of hours, is your first thought, I've now got to sit and make small talk with these colleagues and it's going to be such a mission, or are you excited to spend some time with them, right? So I think that we have a very, very strong leadership team within the firm, and that's made my entrance into the business a lot smoother, in that I've tried to carve out my own area in the firm that I believe I can focus on and grow and build myself. And then obviously the vision at some point is that as I grow within the firm, my role within the firm will start changing slightly, and I'll start moving towards some of the more leadership roles in some of the higher structures. But what has been great is, as I've joined the firm now, I think it's worked very well that my dad is still around and still very much involved in the business in terms of the role he plays and the mentorship that he can provide me and other people within the business. So instead of him resigning one day and me stepping in, it's been a much more slower transition where I'm slowly getting exposed to the right structures and the right environments and the decision-making process and the Nolands way again, so that when that day comes and that transition happens, it'll be a much smoother process than, again, just being parachuted in from the outside.
Yeah, and he's also been working, I guess, on the business rather than in the business for a while. He strikes me as somebody who's quite hands-on, but in terms of day-to-day operations and what have you, you built the structure to do that. A couple of follow-on questions from that is, what advice, given that you are a family, founded and led business yourself, what advice do you give to other family businesses, whether your clients or not, that are going through a similar transition? And then, how do you keep that legacy alive without feeling trapped by it? Without feeling the pressure to, I've got to live up to what my dad did or my uncle, or whatever the case might be. So 2 questions in one. What do you do with other clients and advise them? And then how do you sort of manage that, keeping that legacy alive?
So I think it's very important. I think the transition process is very important. And you don't want to have the situation where the people within the firm feel that whoever's taking over doesn't deserve to be there. So making sure that there is an element of respect and an element of understanding and kind of handover in that process, I think is very, very important. I think you can't do everything yourself. It's never, and I really believe, I'm one of 600 Nolands employees, right? And everyone has their value to add, and everyone has different strengths and weaknesses. And finding a way to leverage those strengths and putting the right people in place in the right areas, regardless of whether it's a family business or not, I think is critically important for succession planning. And you can have the most perfect succession plan in place, but if something goes wrong and something changes, and that plan can fall to pieces very, very quickly unless you have backup plans and alternate solutions, etc. So that's kind of how we've approached. If I decided tomorrow that I didn't want to stay in Nolands and I wanted to do something else, the firm would be perfectly fine. There'd be 10 different people that could step into the role and make sure that this firm could continue for years and years to come. And so I think that's really, really important to plan for all sorts of eventualities, and obviously ensure that everyone is on the same page and that communication is very, very clear in terms of what the future looks like or could look like.
I'm just wondering if there isn't some influence from your dad's sporting days in terms of how he's thought about that. If you think of a rugby team or a soccer team, if you don't have to be in the starting 11. You can be somebody. I'll use a Springbok analogy. If you come in the bomb squad for the last 15 minutes, your role is just as important. But if somebody gets sent off with a yellow card, or it doesn't matter, the team still functions as a team. And I think a lot of those principles are kind of ingrained in the way you guys do business and think about business. Sort of last question. What's next for Nolands? Okay, so you're coming in terms of the next era. You've started Nolands Capital, but what's next, both for you, Stuart, and for the group?
Yeah, so I think continue to consolidate this in the South African market. We really do see ourselves as a very, very viable alternative to the Big Four. And we'd like to position ourselves as the mid-size firm of choice within South Africa. And obviously, as mentioned earlier, continue to expand into the broader African market. So we're looking to open another 5 to 7 offices in Africa by 2030, which I think is very achievable. And continue to filter the values and the lessons that we've learned in the more established firm in South Africa into those markets. And I think what we've really seen is obviously from a compliance and a methodology point of view, we're able to add a lot of value to the smaller, newer firms that are opening up in the different markets. But from a value, a culture, and a way of working, I think that's something that we've been able to transform some of the smaller offices in the African countries, and ultimately create this network that we can rely on from one firm to another, which has been fantastic.
Fantastic. So, I mean, Stuart, before we wrap up, we always do what we call a rapid fire set of questions. So this is a bit of a fun section to hear a little bit more about you. But before we get into that, if you had to give one piece of advice to an entrepreneur or a client sort of building a business today, in particular, a very values-based business, like what would that be?
So I think you need to understand what your values are and stick to them. And once you've decided on your values, every decision that you make, especially in the early stages when you're creating that business infrastructure, you need to ensure that you're making those decisions with those values in mind. I also think there's obviously no substitute for hard work. Starting out a business, there's a lot of luck involved, but there's a lot of hard work involved. And you can't do everything yourself. So surrounding yourself with people that you trust, that you believe in, that you respect, who can help you along that journey, I think will set you up for success.
Fantastic. Okay, so I've got 5 questions for you. You've got 15 seconds on each. What's the best piece of advice you've received from either your father or your uncle?
I think don't take yourself too seriously. I think, we're spending a lot of time at work these days, but you need to enjoy what you do, and you need to enjoy the people you work with.
I love that. Okay. A book or quote that sort of shaped your leadership style?
I think similar. I think it's an African proverb, actually. I think it's along the lines of, if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together.
I love that, and ironically, you actually, when you've got that right, you go faster together, but you first got to get that foundation there, right?
Yeah, correct.
What's been we've spoken a lot about the sort of upside and all the positives. What's been one of the toughest business lessons that you've learned?
Look, I think people, we've spoken a lot about people, and I think people are our strength, but they can also be the biggest weakness if you get your hiring and your culture wrong. And often with people, it involves a lot of difficult conversations. And I think the biggest thing I've learned is with those conversations, it's better to what we call eat a bullfrog early. So you have those conversations as early on. First thing in the morning, you get to office, you realize you've got a problem, you have an open and honest conversation with someone to try and get it out in the open as quickly as possible, rather than letting those things fester under the surface.
I've never heard that saying, but I like it. Eat a bullfrog.
Yeah.
If Nolands were a person, well, I guess Nolands is a person, but if Nolands were a person, how would you describe them?
I think, Nolands would be that friend of a friend that you meet at a braai. Someone that's friendly, personable, knowledgeable, easy to talk to, very eager to understand a little bit more about you and who you are and how you know everyone, and always willing to go that extra mile to make an impact and cement the relationship.
Absolutely love that. And then the last question, it wouldn't be a bizval podcast if I didn't bring the word value into the discussion. Not value as in values, but what does value mean to you both personally and professionally?
So I think, look, there's a softer side of this question. I think value, when you as an individual get value, it's that feeling that you get that you're getting a good service, and no matter what it costs, you're happy to pay for it because you feel like what you're receiving is in excess of what you're giving. And so whether it's personal or professional, I think that's always the hat I have, at least when I'm thinking in terms of value, is ensuring that the person that is receiving that value gets that warm, fuzzy feeling in terms of what they're receiving versus what they are giving up.
I love that. At the end of the day, it's are you solving a customer problem, and are you doing it in a way that makes their life easier in a way? And if you can crack that consistently, that translates through to bottom line, assuming you've got a business model and all of that sort of stuff. Because if you do that, people are prepared to pay more. They're prepared to come back. They're prepared to do all those good things that mathematically, I guess, make a business more valuable. So I love that you've gone back to first principles there. Stuart, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the bizval podcast. I think your story really just will resonate with a lot of listeners. You just deliver it in such a humble, down to earth way that kind of, yeah, as I say, it feels like we're sitting around a braai or a barbecue having a friendly chat. And I think it's about legacy, leadership, and just that relentless focus on people and relationships. So I really want to thank you for joining us today. I'll make one closing comment. We're talking about building, and I've been looking at your background. You've got this, part of town where there's a lot of building going on. This crane has been spinning around during the podcast, and it's just sort of almost a metaphor for like building never stops. It's you don't walk out of here and the job's done with Nolands. It's always ongoing and it's sort of perpetual. And 30 years time, I don't know if they'll be doing podcasts then, but maybe your kids or whatever will be having this conversation down the line. So thanks for joining us. And to our listeners, I hope to see you again soon. Any last closing words, Stuart, before we wrap up?
Just thanks very much for having me, Graham. I've really enjoyed it. It's been great catching up with you, and I really appreciate the opportunity to be on the podcast.
Fantastic. Stuart, thanks for joining us again, and we'll catch you all soon.
Thank you.